Hey there, how's it going? This is James Tripp. This is a video for James Tripp on YouTube. It is for you if you have an interest in hypnosis, neurolinguistics, and change work. So I'm going to be sharing with you here a recent conversation between myself and my good friend Melissa Tiers. If you don't know Melissa, I have had her on the channel before. There's a demo of her doing the reverse spin technique somewhere here on the channel. But if you don't know Melissa, she's a phenomenal trainer of hypnosis, neurolinguistics, and change work based out of New York City. I've known Melissa for a number of years now. What I love about what she does is she takes a lot of quite complex stuff and really boils it down to its most simple moving parts. I often think she comes from a kind of punk rock background, and I think that ethos has come through because in punk rock, you take the basic chords and you make them really rock. This is kind of what Melissa does. That's not to say she, doesn't do it without style and class, because she most certainly does. And she has some phenomenal insights into the neuroscience of it all and how it works. This is what we're going to be jumping into. So we're going to be looking at changing memories, changing habits, and we're going to be looking at this from a neuroscience perspective, how that works with hypnosis and neurolinguistics. But we're also going to go into some other interesting areas, working with the unknown, working with complexity, how to take simple approaches to working with complexity, and how to be able to create with whatever comes your way. So it's quite a wide-ranging conversation. Before we get into the conversation, there's an announcement that I want to make. As a lot of people know, for the last 3 years or so, I have been teaching hypnosis online through a medium called the Hypnosis Without Trance Online Deep Apprenticeship. I am retiring this program. I want you to know I'm retiring this program. Some people watching this will have been members of that at some point. Some will be members currently and they'll know that I'm retiring the program. And some may have been considering joining. I want to say this program will be retired, but there are 630 lessons on hypnosis and change work inside of that, mostly video lessons, some audio lessons, and a whole bunch of open frames as well. I am giving the opportunity for people before the 10th of July to get a lifetime access to that. So if you're interested in that, you'll find a link around there. If you want to message me personally, if you have been a member in the past, I can arrange a discount for you on that lifetime access. So make sure, if that's something you're interested in and you have been a member in the past, you get in contact. But I'll put a link around there somewhere or in the description to that information. Okay, so let's dive into this conversation. This is Melissa Tiers, Integrative Hypnotist. If you want to find out about Melissa's work, just Google the Center for Integrative Hypnosis, or you can check out integrativechangework.com. You'll find Melissa that way. Let's dive into this conversation.
I jokingly said, when we did the first series of master classes, I was saying, all right, the first one should be like self-directed neuroplasticity. And she's like, that ain't gonna sell.
Yeah.
You think that's sexy. Other people don't know what the fuck it means. So she changed it to how to change any habit. And I'm like, oh no, that's horrible. I can't do that. And she got 5,000 people register for that thing.
Yeah.
This is the way she kind of works.
Right.
And
But she's saying how to change.
that each masterclass delivers so much stuff that that's all they took from you. They have amazing stuff to go out and play with. And she's really smart there. Don't hold back on the good stuff, give it. And the same thing with, therapeutic memory reconsolidation turned into how to change any memory, which I would never promise, which I would never say. But
Well, in a sense though, I mean, like talking about how to change any memory. One of the things I'm doing all the time with the military vets, right, is that they all got PTSD, right? They've all got stuff. They've all got stuff that haunts them, let's say, whether they're being consciously aware of it or they're somatically reacting to it, even though it's outside of consciousness in that moment. I don't have to go digging for that stuff. It comes bubbling to the surface. Now, if somebody said to me, James, could you guarantee that you can change those memories? It's like, actually, probably yes. I think I can make that guarantee, providing the person is willing to engage fully and sincerely and playful.
No, I get it. And I fully agree because we both understand how memory works or doesn't.
Yeah. I think beyond that, the nature of what can be said or can be promised around personal change, these sorts of things, is a really interesting topic, because you get some people who are totally in the camp of, well, you can't really change anything about who you really are, all of this. And then you get other people that are saying, well, you can change anything just like that with the wave of the magic wand. And I think it leaves people confused as to what is possible, what's reasonable, what's potentially there for them in terms of changing who they are and how they engage with the world. You know, talking about the information on your information page around your integrative change work training.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how you might put something one way, but your marketing wizard has got other ways of framing things, right? And we were having that discussion about how well these promises match reality. So there were two things that came up there, which was how to change any memory. And was the other one how to change any habit?
Yeah. And what, just for people listening, we were talking about the different ways of seeing and approaching the work, and how when we were doing these free master classes, I gave her, the topic of self-directed neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
Right. A title that I would immediately click on if it, because as she
you're
said,
a geek.
She's like, you find that sexy, Melissa. And she took that and she changed it to how to change any habit.
Right.
And the other one on therapeutic memory reconsolidation, she changed to how to change any memory. And while we laugh at it, she got thousands of people who might otherwise not have learned self-directed neuroplasticity or about memory reconsolidation to sign on and, walk away understanding memory in a very different way.
Yeah.
Right? Understanding habituated patterns in a very different way. And I'm a big believer in arming people with different ways to help themselves in this crazy ass world we live in. And so just, just leading with that, here's a protocol for you to change your brain. Right. And I'm a bit of a zealot when it comes to that. I think every practitioner should be able to arm their clients with different ways to get out of an unwanted state into a better state and lock it the fuck in. You know what I mean? And so between that and, my fervor around the new research coming out on just how malleability plays into memory retrieval of any kind, and I think that if people understood that more, certainly in our world, right? In the coaching world, the hypnosis world, the therapy world, I, for 20 years was training therapists and psychiatrists. So their ideas of what's achievable are very different than ours, right? We come from, whether it's NLP and the modeling system and understanding how, the subjective experience can be manipulated in many different ways and how that changes the output. I think that coming from that very different place and entering a world where they think personalities are fixed and certain things are just the way they are, and there's, with you can't fix it, but you can manage it with medication. I think it's a very different animal. And slowly, some of the research in neuroscience is making its way into the more traditional therapy rooms, but it's very slow. So, just being on the training end of these things has been pretty vital to where I've been for 20 years, and it changes all the time, right? Because we didn't really know about therapeutic memory reconsolidation in the way that we do even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, that is how fast it's changing.
Yeah. And I think you know a lot more about this from the sort of research end than I do. A lot of the work that I do, and I was just saying this before, I'm working with military vets who are coming in with PTSD diagnosis. I always will put air quotes around that for anyone who's listening to this in audio. Please note there were air quotes. And, so I'm working all the time with what I often refer to as encoded material. Okay. They've got stuff that's in the data banks there, in the memories that are a part of what's driving certain responses to the world around them at the moment. And they sometimes are explicitly aware of this stuff coming up, and they're trying to struggle to push it away because they don't like what comes up with it, the effect that comes up with it. And sometimes that stuff is just bubbling up in the background. I was working with somebody the other day, I'd done one session with them and they came back for a second session and said, yeah, I've had a pretty good week. Only a couple of instances of strange things would come up. And I said, well, what's that? He said, they'd come back from the gym and they were going up the stairs and they were in a perfectly good mood. They come back from the gym and their wife had got a new quote for a new boiler. And she was coming up the stairs after him saying, oh, it's really good. They're going to install it like this. And he suddenly got this feeling and he turned around and just snapped, back off and give me some space. And he said, like, I don't know where that came from. And I said, what was the other incident? He said, well, I was at a school playground and there was a little, I was talking to this guy and he was asking me a lot of questions about stuff. And there was this little kid behind me and he's just behind me, kept messing with my hood. And I just felt, and he started to react and he turned around and snapped at this kid. I'm like, curious. I said, out of those two things, what have you got in common? He said, there was someone behind me. I said, interesting. I said, when was the first time, what comes up for you? You think about someone behind you. It doesn't have to be right. Just follow the feeling back. Like totally casually, not like a formal regression or anything.
Sure.
And this guy had been a police officer and he'd had 2 instances where bad things had happened after being jumped from behind. Now, when he accessed either or both of these memories, immediately he had a lot of strong stuff coming up. He was kind of reacting. The breathing would get uptight. This is what I actually did with him. I said, would you mind, just out of curiosity, would you mind standing up? Because this is a one-to-one session. He stood up. And I said, okay, if you just stand there, I'm just going to take a step round behind you. And as I stepped round behind me, he involuntarily, his whole body turned round on the defensive. It's like he couldn't let me step behind. I said, okay, I'm going to invite you to just continue to look at that wall and be aware that I'm going to step round behind you and everything's going to be okay. So I step round behind you and I slowly step round behind me and he's having to really work hard to stay looking at the wall and not turn round. But the interesting thing about that is a lot of people might think, well, that's going to be a really tricky bit of business to sort out. But there's a plethora of tools. And I think once people understand, and this is something I think you understand better than I do from a scientific perspective, a neurological perspective, every time somebody's accessing that memory, every time it's coming up, there's an opportunity there to change it.
That's right.
It's absolutely right there, opportunity to change it. And there's almost like probably the ways in which it can be changed are probably limited to somebody's imagination. There's so many possibilities as to what, what could be done. I used about 3 methods with this guy to run down the charge off this memory. At the beginning, he gave us a scale of 8 out of 10 in terms of the effect coming up.
Yeah.
By the end of it, he said, I don't know. I just feel like I've taken a Valium now. And he's fully able to remember this stuff. Now, as a change practitioner, I'm not making a promise and going, and now your life is going to be like whatever going forward. It's like, well, we don't know how things are going to be different, but I'm willing to bet pretty heavy money that things are going to be different.
Yeah.
So
I think James, you're covering, even in this little example, so many elements that are really vital to understand, which is, the nervous system activation, right? The looking for the common theme. And I think even like traditionally minded therapists would notice, yes, obviously something bad happened when someone was behind you. This is being re-triggered, right? But the understanding, and this is where we get back to memory, the understanding of the opportunity in this literally change how that memory gets reconsolidated back into the brain and nervous system is where the crux is. How you get there, as you said, there's a million ways, right? It's only limited by your imagination. And, but knowing when it's activated, that you've got that window of opportunity to put in what we call the prediction error, right? That is what's necessary and vital for the memory to go into that kind of synaptic unlocking.
Can you say something about that prediction error? Like unpack that a little bit.
I know you're a fan of Lisa Feldman Barrett, right?
Yeah.
So you understand the predictive nature of the brain. Well, when it comes to memory reconsolidation, one of the key components is when the memory gets activated, right? And it becomes malleable. What really sets it into the real change process is when you put in a mismatch. A prediction error refers to the brain is predicting, it runs on prediction, right?
Yeah.
It's predicting that by you standing behind the guy, he's going to feel that intensity. You do some maneuvers, some, tricks, some change work bits. And all of a sudden you can stand behind him and he feels like he's taken a Valium. In that moment, the prediction error comes into play because the brain is predicting anxiety, high anxiety at that point. And instead, now we have this mismatch. Wait, someone is behind me and I'm feeling totally calm. What happens then is they call it a synaptic unlocking of this key component piece, because the brain needs to evolve. It needs to keep up with what it deems as a working model of reality.
Right.
And that prediction, I mean, that's how we evolved as a species, right? I listened to someone give this great metaphor, because I always, when I'm teaching memory reconsolidation in my classes, I always go, lean on the lazy one, which is, look, back in the day, let's say a caveman was going to collect berries, and you always know where the good sweet berries are because that's important. That's yummy back then with no candy bars, right?
Yeah.
And so your brain goes to where it always goes. You're not going to forget where it is because it's important, right? And when the person goes there expecting berries and instead sees, saber-toothed tigers have decided to make that area their home, that moment, there's a prediction error. I'm predicting berries. I get tigers. The brain says, drop a flag. We need to remember this is not a good place to go for yummy treats. This is a place to avoid, right? To not become a yummy treat yourself. In that moment, the brain updates. Now, it's not like somebody totally forgets that they used to get berries there, but the emotional track has changed and now it's a place to be avoided. It's just the updating nature of our brain, right? For new information. Everybody knows what it's like to have maybe been with someone, a partner in the past, and then, it breaks down or it turns bad. And then later on, you look back and you think, how the hell did I ever think that person was good, for me or whatever. They can't even remember unless you've got good friends that are like, oh, please, you were so smitten. You know what I mean? Like you were totally in love. You're like, no, how could I don't remember. I don't feel that because the brain has updated. So that's just the way that we would normally describe memory reconsolidation as an adaptive unconscious process, as evolutionarily relevant thing for our species. But I heard this great, I'm trying to remember her name. My goodness, I can't remember. She did a little online class on memory reconsolidation. And she said this, and I hadn't heard this before. When astronauts come back from space, they have to relearn gravity. It's like they go up there and they're used to, if they let go of a pen, it floats in front of them. And if they're there for a while, that prediction error initially is very discombobulating. So they give people practice before they go into no gravity, right?
Yeah.
What happens is after a while, your brain adapts. Okay, this is how reality is now, right? They come back down to Earth. And there's a while that it takes for them to stop dropping things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it no longer floats in front of them. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I hadn't
That's
heard
a,
that before.
that's a great frame, because I love, I love any framing bits of business that I can
I
use
know
with
you
clients. And that one's a gorgeous frame. And it's,
That's
it's
what
one,
I thought.
yeah. I think it's one that a lot of people could relate to, because, even if you spend, at least this is what's coming up for me. If I spend an hour on an ice rink or something like that, just skating around,
Yeah.
when I first take the skates off and I'm back on the ground, it's like just for a few moments, it's like, this is weird, because I'm used to being on ice skates now. So you can imagine if you're up in like the International Space Station for however many months or
6
whatever.
months or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, I just took my mother and some family members on a cruise. You
Mm.
get back on land, and for days you're swaying.
Yeah.
For days.
Right.
You still got your sea legs on. It's a
Yeah.
thing. But also, do you remember years ago that guy who built a bicycle?
Yeah. The way you have to turn
Right.
that way
We
to go
have
that
to
way.
turn it different. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's just so non-intuitive. And he would challenge people to try and ride this bicycle. And people logically would say, well, okay, I just turn it this way then. But because it is truly an embodied learning, you know what I mean? It's part of that system. It takes people so long to relearn this. And then they can't
Right.
ride a regular bike. for a
Right.
while when they go to it.
And this is a huge thing, because, I'm kind of harping on about it, but right, prediction error as well. Like,
That's it.
there's a few things about that. Like, number one, I know I go on about it all the time, but it's a significant part of the work that I do. But again, working with the military vets, they've got that whole thing going on, right? They're adapted to certain contexts. They're adapted to certain ways of being in the world, certain ways of engaging with the world. That they've been living and breathing that for a long time. And then the people I'm working with, they get a medical discharge, and now they've got this life.
Yes.
And it's completely different. And everyone says, well, the work you do, it's all PTSD stuff, isn't it? It's like, well, actually, no. Some of it is just basic adaptation stuff. It's not about trauma. It's about adaptation. It's about the life they've become adapted to, the way of being, the way of engaging,
And again, their nervous system is trained to be on high alert. It has to be.
Yeah.
And so when you're walking around in your kid's playground on fucking high alert, it's not a conscious thing. It is absolutely the adaptive unconscious at play, doing what it does well, doing what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's not abnormal. It is so normal.
Yeah. And I say this, like, this is part of my framing.
It's abnormal, but don't get me started.
Right. It is, and I say it's part of my framing piece. I say, I don't do diagnosis. I say, that's not me. I'm not qualified to do diagnosis. But I'm going to break that rule. I am actually going to give you a diagnosis, if that's okay. I say to them, they're like, well, yeah, sure. I say, what you got going on here is a case of having what's called a healthy, adaptive mammalian brain. Now, of course, what they've got is a diagnosis of PTSD.
Right.
But, what is PTSD? What is the trauma? Well, if we take the sort of meaning-laden word trauma off, well, it's an event, it's a happening, it's a circumstance, it's a situation. And healthy, adaptive mammalian brains, they adapt to situations. They learn things. You chuck a cat on a hot stove, it burns its paws, right? Not that I would do such a thing. I'm just saying that if a person did, but like, what would the sensible response to that stove be for the cat? It would have an embodied response of get away from the stove, or maybe get away from the person that chucked them on the stove.
That's right. That would be smart. Yeah.
This is a healthy, adaptive mammalian brain. So I'm often pointing this out to people. I say that healthy adaptiveness, that ability for your brain to adapt, that's still here. You still have this. So I'm telling people this because it's true.
Yeah.
It's not, it's as true can be. And that's such a relief for people so much of the time. And that point about prediction error, I think it's an interesting way of putting it, because I never thought about it like that. But I'm always, what I call, I'm always calling it spotlighting, shining the spotlight of consciousness, because I want people to witness. And what I want them to witness is the prediction error, you see, the new like, oh, this is not what we were anticipating.
Yes.
I'll often say to clients, like once we've got a big shift, I'll say, if I'd have said to you before you came in today that you were going to be able to think about that event and just experience it like this, completely calm, what would you have said to me? And I go, well, you know, I'd have said you were crazy or like, no way or whatever, you know, and I guess what I'm doing is I'm highlighting, I'm sort of trying to get as much juice out of that new live counterexample. It's not like some framing counterexample where you come up with some counterexample argument, but it's an experiential counterexample. And intuitively, I have the sense that that is powerful. But you probably know something more of the science of it, if you see what I mean, thinking about it in terms of that prediction error.
I mean, it is that. It's embodied, right? So it can't just be intellectual, right? If we could change a memory just by kind of talking about it and rationally just, well, you're no longer in the war zone. And now that you know that, you know, you're at the playground.
Yeah.
It worked that way. Then, you know, then we'd all still be doing, you know, the old fashioned traditional type of therapeutic interventions, you know, but the truth is it has to be embodied. It has to be associated in order to activate the relevant neural network at play. If you have people talking about their post-traumatic stress disorder, about their trauma, they're still dissociated, and you cannot be sure that the thing is activated enough where the prediction error is going to throw a wrench into that machine. So, yeah. So, I mean, you know that I'm big on teaching, you know, the kind of structure of change that I teach, the 4 steps, you know, and step 1, associate into the problem is so that it is lit up. It's embodied. You've got the nervous system online. Because without that, it's an intellectual exercise that doesn't necessarily get the job done. I'm not saying it can't. There are people that in that intellectual exercise of talking about it will associate in and embody it.
Yeah.
So it happens sometimes. What you want is you want to be more strategic.
Yes.
So that you know how to make it happen more often than, you know what I mean? Than just random. Than people just accidentally associating into and lighting up the neural network.
And if you allow people to associate in the way that they naturalistically would, they're going to fire that material up the way they would fire it up, and nothing gets changed about it. You know, so this particular client that I'm thinking about, he started to tell me about these events. And when he started to tell me about them, he associated in, but he also had a narrative structure that was plugged into that all kind of held the pieces in place in exactly the right way.
Yes.
You know, so by talking along with it in the way that he is currently making sense of it, holding that sense together, that's not a useful re-accessing or re-embodying at all.
Right, because what's happening is there's no prediction error. So he might be accessing the memory, that narrative, you know, that you just mentioned, right? That holds it all together, locks in many ways the original memory, you know, form.
Yeah.
And sorry, let me just shut this off. The original memory form without the prediction error, it just gets reconsolidated back into the same regions of the brain with kind of the same intensity. Now, sometimes in talking about it and leaning a little bit more into the narrative aspect of it, it can get reconsolidated and lose some of the charge, but it's an incremental change. It isn't a massive update that we're looking for when we do our change work. So that is why therapy does work for a lot of people, because in talking about it, putting voice to it, giving narrative to it, eventually it will be reconsolidated a little, you know, with a little less charge and a little less charge and a little less charge.
Providing the narrative is evolving and being upgraded into a more generative.
And even if the narrative is being shared with, let's say, a compassionate listener. That is the other thing. You know, the work of Bonnie, God damn, what's her last name? She wrote this book, Being a Brainwise Therapist.
Right.
And what she does and the way that she conceptualizes this, it was many years ago I read it, so let me see if I could not butcher her idea, is that she holds what she calls the right brain state. We would call it trance. You know? And so when the client is giving that narrative, telling their trauma story, it's with this witness. It's with this compassionate witness that she says then gets reencoded. It's added into the reconsolidation. So it might not take the charge off completely in the way that you and I like to work, but eventually it does. It takes charge off because it gets reencoded with compassion, reencoded with, you know, the comfort that wasn't there during the original trauma or the original thing. So there's many ways this gets done. And in more traditional, because I train therapists, I know dynamically how it can happen. I'm always, you know, looking at any therapy model with a lens of what's happening in the brain. Like, how is this unfolding for the client? And are the necessary steps to change the brain in place? And if it isn't, then it's not necessarily a therapeutic intervention I am interested in learning.
Yes.
I mean, anyway.
I need that reference you just said.
Which, Being a Brainwise Therapist?
Was that who wrote that?
Bonnie, I want to say Badenoch or something, but it's Bonnie, and then the last name is with
right. Okay. That's really interesting to me because, you know, you're saying about the way we like to work. I actually work in two very different ways. So I do a lot of process heavy work sometimes, but I do a lot of conversational work, right? So I do a lot of, you know, something like you might call it conversational hypnosis.
Well, so do I.
I know, I know you do. You know, so I often get a lot of really big shifts. So this client had come back for a second session and he said, it's been a really good week when he had a couple of things. Before, he'd had really bad all day, every day. And I did no explicit interventions with that, but I am paying attention to how he's accessing things. I'm paying attention to his state. I'm aware that I'm a part of the system now because we're in communication.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of ground of being that I can bring, which once he's connecting into that sort of ground of being that I'm bringing, and he's talking about stuff, and I'm sort of encouraging more space, more expansiveness. Now, this is the way I experience it within myself, is space and expansiveness. And I may weave some reframes in that and tell some stories and this kind of thing, but I'm still thinking about very much what's happening on the state level. You know, I got this idea, what you cannot be with will not let you be. So you pull her up and
say that again.
It's an idea I heard from somebody, some shadow worker years ago, but it really struck me. It's like what you cannot be with will not let you be. Right? So if you think about this from a perspective of, let's say somebody's got some memory material that's driving a certain response set. Normally, they don't want to be with it for starts. They're staying the hell away from it. And when they are being with it, they're being with it in a certain way. They're always reacting to it in the same way. They're always holding it in place in the same way. So they're usually struggling against it somehow, or adding a load of meanings onto it, or you know, and so the issue is like an issue of how are they going to be with this? How can I bring about a different being with this material? So for me, like sometimes that might look a lot like doing, you know, an NLP fast phobia kind of a thing, because that seems like the best tool for the job in that moment. Sometimes, like if I'm working with, say, military vets, they're coming in and they're not ready to dive straight into that crazy stuff. They just want to talk about, they're desperate. They don't know what's happening for them. They want to have somebody to talk to. So I'm like acting like the guy they can just talk to. But at the same time, I'm thinking about, as they're accessing this stuff that's just coming up inside of them, what can I bring to this exchange that's going to change it right now? Because they are accessing it and they are changing it. So I really like this idea. And I've got stuff like in there about creating space, being an empathetic witness, just allowing my body to release and allowing that release to come into there.
That's exactly, you would really like Bonnie's work, because
Right.
so many levels you are embodying what she's teaching. The other thing I would like to share, now, I mean, I'm sure you've heard me do this because I've gone there to teach, and you've sat in my classes. But one of the things that I try to make explicit when I'm teaching is, we have this idea, and the reason I'm sharing this is because you said the vets come in and they're not necessarily ready to dive into like the stuff, right? They want to talk about it. They want to see, one of the ways that I conceptualize, or kind of a model that I hold in mind, is that, we know how neural networks kind of are formed, right? Based on early sensory experience. And, you've heard me teach about, coaching the unconscious mind and being aware of, the embodied stuff underneath. And, I imagine, right, that stuff creates kind of a hub in a neural network that then expands and grows, but it still contains the original. So when somebody comes in and they say, every time someone's behind me, I have this, this visceral response. Even if you didn't go into the, what does this remind you of, and kind of take, go back, even if you just dealt with what happened yesterday, that neural network is lit up, and it contains within it the connection to the original thing. To the original thing, the subsequent things that locked in the original thing, also contains how the original thing affected their beliefs about the world, about themselves. So we've got beliefs in there. It affects their values, the blueprint, the unconscious blueprint that's underneath their models of the world. It's all connected. So if you were to just work on helping them be at the playground with a kid behind them, or helping them, in this one memory with the wife coming up the stairs, that help is actually trickling back. That it is inadvertently also affecting the original memory, because you can't, it's a gestalt. You can't affect this neuroassociative cluster that is the problem. And not have it affect. That's why a lot of the work in therapeutic memory reconsolidation will work on different aspects of it, right? If you look at Bruce Eckert, his form of therapy is very different than what we do. And yet he was the one that really brought the science of memory reconsolidation out into the therapy realm. You know what I mean? And his, what is it? I forget what he calls it, but it's, God help me, I should have had another cup of coffee. But if you Google Bruce
That's
Eckert,
always true.
but his thing works by having the mismatch, having the prediction error, right? Because he gets the belief underneath this problem. What's the belief, right? I'll never be good enough, or I'll fail at everything, or I can't be better than my father.
Right.
What the belief is. And I think he has them write it like on a card, and then through the week, read it in the face of disconfirming information. So here I am saying I can't do anything right, but now I'm looking at my, my degree on the wall.
Right. It's an experiential counterexam.
Right. And they do that for a week or two. And that spurs on the memory reconsolidation. I'm not a big fan of that model, only because I think it takes too long. I think what we know, the research on memory reconsolidation is the window kind of stays open for like 5 or 6 hours. So
it's really interesting.
I don't want my client having to reactivate that all the time in order to encode the new memory. But Anyway,
Right. And you probably don't have to. I mean, I do a lot of stuff with beliefs as well.
Yeah, because it's all part of the same neural network.
Yeah, because when they're accessing the belief, it's firing it up. So
that's it. So quite often, and I mean, I've said this countless times, even in some botched keynote address. People keep asking me to do these. It's really not my element, but whatever. Because you're supposed to actually like rehearse for things like that. But I just can't do that. But one of the things that I've been going on and on about for all these years when I teach at like hypnosis conferences is, look, we keep fighting over, is this the right form? No, you've got to regress to cause. No, and this camp is like, no, you've got to get the cognitive dissonances. No, you've got to work on core beliefs. No, it's all about the values. No, it's all about the behavior.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, we're all right. Right?
Yeah.
We're all right, people. Can we get together and understand that we're all, we're all touching the same freaking element?
Yeah, I think like, my view of change work is really simplistic. Now, I'll do it in a variety of different ways because I love different approaches and I've spent years looking at different approaches.
Yeah, and it's dopamine for you and the client when it's different.
Right. But for me, it's always the same. It's fire it up and get change. That's it. Right. But either something fires up the same way over and over and over and over, in which case that's no change.
Right.
Or you fire it up and you get change. And it's not that hard to get change. In fact, it's really quite easy. I mean, okay, you're going to get some clients who are actually going to fight tooth and nail to keep everything organized just the way it was, but for some reason. And I play a line I got
that
from
some reason is certainty, which feels good to the brain.
Right. Yeah.
Even if it's fucked up.
One of my favorite lines, I got this off a fellow coach, Rob's Recovery. He always just says, when people are doing this, he says, this is change work, not sameness work. Super simple line. Just like, are we going to do some different stuff here? Or are we going to do some sameness stuff? Because it's entirely down to you, but I'm going to admit my bias is towards some difference. I once people are on board and they go, okay, I'm willing to go all in here. It's almost like you cannot not change stuff. I mean, people have to then start working to put it back together the way it was. And of course, people are entitled to think that work. Yeah. But it's not gonna, it's not gonna happen without work. Once you start firing that stuff up and introducing change, whatever that might be, and that change can be done in so many different ways. It could be, close your eyes and run through this process. It occurred to me when I was with this particular guy that I was talking about, I did a few things with him. The first thing I did was I did an eye movement thing, super fast eye movement thing. And that made a bit of a dent. And then he still had some stuff, residual stuff. So I got him to stand up and look out the window at the hills and just open up his peripheral vision and see all the Pendleton hills. And I was moving my fingers in his peripheral vision saying, can you see my fingers moving? And I just created this space and got him to float details of the memory through the space, right, which is something I use reasonably often.
Nice.
And he sat back down and like that really made a difference. And like he seemed to be in a really different zone with this. And I said, there's probably a point in this memory where you would definitely say it was after the memory, right? Where it's all kind of wrapped up. It's all behind you now, He said, yeah. And he started to describe it, but then he went back into a whole bunch of narrative stuff. Like it started putting it back together. And I'm like, right, hang on a second. Hang on. We're in a good place here. And I could hear him like starting to sort of reconstruct things. And at that point, I haven't actually done a fast phobia cure for a long time, but for some reason that seemed like the right thing to do in that moment. And I don't know why this was the right thing to do until afterwards. And I had a theory as to why. I think there'd been key elements within the memory that we'd actually honed in on and what I call run the charge off. This is the phrase I tend to use, run the charge off it. But the whole thing had an overall narrative structure. So it had a beginning, like old classic 3-act formula, beginning, middle, and end. And we'd picked certain key points and done those in isolation, but then the overall narrative was kind of trying to put it all back together.
Sure.
So I ran this fast phobia cure, which just for the interest of people listening who are geeks for this, it's the cinema rewind technique, people call it. You've got somebody there looking up at the screen. They're going to watch through. You're going to see.
I think they refer to it now for the most part as VK dissociation,
Right.
visual aesthetic dissociation.
Yeah. There's the classic, which you can do in a variety of different ways, but the classic one is the cinema.
So many different ways. And I got to share with you, you would love my friend John Overdurf's very different version, which just, instead of isolating the movie, beginning, middle, end.
Yeah.
As people go way out,
okay,
way out to the end, where they are solid and good and living an amazing life. He then takes this amazing feeling, tracks it way back to like playing as a 3-year-old. He expands this movie, not just from safe to safe, but expands it to the bigger, broadest, you can imagine, bookended by these amazing, free, kind of joyous emotions.
Right. That's nice.
And it's really beautiful, because one of the things that, people do, especially with trauma, is, they are like they've made, gifts, or is it GIFs? No one can tell me.
I think it's supposed to be, everyone calls them GIFs, but somebody said it is actually supposed to be GIF, but
anyway, out of the trauma, and it's just playing on a loop.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't end well. So, to elongate that and really have to look at the narrative that is your life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In a big way is a really nice one. And that is,
you could like go intergenerational and like,
think of all the creative ways you can play with that.
Right. Well, here's a thing that I tend to do with it. Here's the little bits of difference that I often do. So like the classic fast phobia cure is, you're sat there and you're looking up, and then you float up to the projection booth and you can look down at yourself.
Double dissociate.
Right. I double dissociate by having them move up 3 or 4 seats, 3, 4 or 5 seats, so they can see their own face as they watch what they're watching. Right. And I also say this is a special kind of cinema, so it works by remote control, and you have to control. All
right, good. Because the only reason I really liked the projection booth was that you're running the show.
No. So
you're running the show.
Yeah.
You hit play. You hit rewind.
Yeah. Right. And I've also got that little bit of business with the ambiguity on you've got the control.
Yes.
So they're going to run it up and down, and they're going to watch themselves watching it, but they're going to watch their face. And what you get is they see all their emotional responses, and this switches on the kind of relational part of the brain. So they then like have some empathy. Sometimes I run it back through and I say, you can give a few coaching tips if you want, or just any kind of reassurance you want to give. So they're put in a position of sort of almost like a coach to themselves as they watch it through. They've got that human angle, that human element. So I really like that. And then whatever resource state they build from out there.
For a second, just stop.
Yeah.
That little piece is so beautiful and so creative.
Well,
so fucking good.
I'm sure I co-created it with a whole bunch of other people's ideas. Like, I know, like
as we do anything, but this idea of watching the emotional range on the face, and then also being the coach, so I want to stop for a moment to let it sink in, and also to share just the big smile I'm wearing when we'll like just lay a subtle variation on something, that we've all known for years and years. But that subtle variation is so rich with so many layers that even you probably don't recognize.
I think like some of it comes from some of that idea. Lisa Schwartz, who does a thing called the comprehensive resource modeling. She's got a bunch of stuff.
Talking about her,
yeah. So she's really into there's a lovely poetic phrase, pseudoscientific poetic phrase she talks about, which is the neurobiology of attachment. So, she does these kind of shamanic practices where you like have an attachment ritual with like a spirit animal, right? Okay. But it's like, she talks about it as evoking the neurobiology of attachment. But there's this sort of idea that like different parts of our brain are fired up when we're in relation to another human being. Now, it kind of struck me about this, that if somebody's just looking at a little dot down there at the back of a head, But that's one kind of dissociation. But you know, what does it bring when somebody's really in relationship with that self that was the dissociated self? But it sort of tends to build a set of resources within the person. And I will often, like at the end of the experience, I will have them go in and and I do this sort of like back and forth switching of perceptual positions between the them at the end of the experience, them, and the them now. And I have them send new knowing, new understanding, new support. And then I have them switch in and go and experience receiving that. So they have the experience of receiving this as well. So like these for me are just extra layers on top. And like, I really like that because I can bring that overdub stuff in with that mix as well. And to me, it's all like, I just think, well, here's an extra bit we can do. Here's an extra bit we can do. And I'm checking in to see what kind of difference this makes. And of course, one thing I know is at the end of this, that memory ain't nothing like it was, right? It's nothing like it was. But the thing that occurred to me about this guy in particular, and it never occurred to me before, it's such an obvious thought, is I wonder how much of the value of this was him just running the whole thing through from beginning to end without adding all the usual narrative crap that he would put on top of it. No, I'm not dismissing him in any discompassionate way when I say narrative crap, but you know what I'm saying? Like when he would normally go through it, like he's not been able to engage in his usual sense making around it at all. Right.
I think people don't understand how much our sense making, that narrative tightens the whole and keeps it together, and how much of our perceptual positions are habitual. So that is the other bit that I really liked about what you just shared. You know, it is really kind of almost like the way that I'm like thinking of it is really busting down kind of the boundary conditions of that neural network, right? Just by breaking the habituated pattern of the perceptual position that you're in and that you're typically stuck in this particular context, we are almost always seeing the thing the way that we've always seen it from a certain perceptual position. And so by switching those things and kind of going back and forth and adding in the difference, adding in the resource, adding in the knowing, you know, you're really breaking down that boundary condition. That's cool.
Yeah. And, you know,
I get a little excited when there's like this other little tweak now that I can think about.
Yeah. And I think this is what I like about this. I think this is how you and I are similar in that, okay, I'll use bits out of stock processes and that kind of thing. But, you know, to me, a stock process is a thing to be learned from rather than learned.
Yes.
You know, it's like, well, what does this bit do? What does this maneuver do? What are we actually doing here? What if I took that out and plugged that into that, or use that over there, or use that over there? And in the end, I think it's like becoming more, I know you've got like this punk rock ethos, or at least, you know, that's something I think people associate with you, but it's like that ability to improvise. It's sort of like that jazz quality. We've got these bits. Okay, we know the rough theme. We know what we're doing. We know what we're playing around. We understand the structure of the piece of music, but we can improvise around it. Which for me,
also just really understanding. I think we both share this curiosity to understand what's going on underneath this thing. Right?
Yeah.
What are the elements at play here? Why is this successful? Why is that pattern working?
Yeah.
Right. And what does it have in common with this other thing that works? And,
yes.
you know, and in the same way, I do that with problems too, right? How is this problem being held together? Right? What has to be true in order for this to be sustained?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And John would say, what do they have to be good at? Right.
Right.
What did he used to call it? The hidden ability. Right. What does this person have to be really fucking good at in order to maintain this problem? And how can we use that?
Yeah.
Right. So
I think so much of this does like unfold out. I'll probably put this recording out on my Agents of Everything podcast. And the point of Agents of Everything, that came about because I got into NLP, I got into other stuff because I was fascinated by it. Not because I thought, you know what, I really want to be a guy in an office that people pay and come to see to to change things, right? That wasn't my aim. It started with a fascination. How do we make our worlds? How do we create in the world? How do we engage with the world? What makes us who we are? Is that fixed? Can we change this? You know, I had all these questions that I wanted to get into and start to play with this stuff. And then I ended up in an office with people coming, you know, it hit me a little while ago. I still do that work and I get a lot of satisfaction, but that wasn't my raison d'etre.
And also, this is another thing we have in common, right? I was still a punk rock musician, you know, like hypnotizing people in the back of, you know, the
Right.
club, right?
Yeah.
To me, it was all about what is this? What does this say about our mind? What the hell? You know, how is this working? I never imagined that I would also be in an office
Yeah.
helping people to change these things. You know, it was just like how it played out. I mean, I still think, and I think we share this as well because you and I know each other and we're friends. You know, I still think that it's the curiosity, right, that keeps us in the game.
Good. For me, it certainly is. I mean,
Yeah.
like, you know, I do a day a week with Rock's Recovery, working with the military vets. I don't need that. I don't need the money. You know, I do it because it's a different demographic from the kind of client that's going to come to me because they know my work online or something like that.
Right. It's
You know,
very,
so it's a whole different game. They've got no idea, like the H word, hypnosis, never get mentioned. Most people that come to me online, they know I've got some hypnosis stuff. They often want that. So I like the challenge of working in that environment. And I like what I get to learn about working outside of, you know, more formal settings. And this is for me. I also love what I've learned from doing change work formally, which I can then take back out into the world. You know, when I see somebody who's got stuck in a real life situation in the world, when I say stuck, I mean stuck in a response set or a reaction set or something like that. How can I break this pattern? How can I help this person change this pattern so they can reconnect to choice or a more resource base or whatever it might be? And certainly with my kids, that's where I love, in a sense, using this stuff the most. It's not to kind of reprogram them or something, but just help them when they've got stuck, when they've got caught in a reaction set that's not serving them.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, this is why with my Agents of Everything podcast, it's not a very focused podcast, but it comes from that idea of not being an agent of change in the office. What if we're all agents of change in the world? And what kind of changes do we want to be able to bring about? We're working with other people. We're creating with other people. We're connecting with other people, you know, and the world is full of people who are all coming from different reality tunnels more than ever before. And being able to see that and not get caught up in that necessarily, that kind of like people can drop into the me versus you. It's like, okay, so what's going on a deeper level? How can we maybe go beyond some of what's keeping us all stuck in some ways?
I kind of co-founded this collective, right? It's called the Ethical Coaching Collective, and it's just the organizational body that we certify through in integrative change work, right? And the whole reason behind that is to have more impact in the world, right? So, you know, teaming up with volunteers, teaming up with, you know, I have an impact scholarship for my course, where if you have boots on the ground, if you're doing good work, and you know what I mean, and not necessarily being financially compensated in a way that allows you to take a big training, then I want you, right? I want to spread out this stuff. So it's having a broader conversation with the world. You know, how do we take it beyond? How do we change the dynamic in, you know, organizations, in, you know, social workers, you know, who are paid and undervalued? How do we, you know, get these skills?
Yeah. And to me,
places.
right. That's a fascinating thing. I mean, I know, like, we don't get to choose in life exactly our paths. You know, we sort of co-create it with what's unfolding around us and this kind of thing. I do have a particular interest in working in very different contexts from the ones that I've been able to work with. This is why I have an interest in organizational development and stuff like that. It's not because I want a job as an organizational development consultant.
Right.
It's just, well, it will be so interesting to see what, what could be brought from what I've had the opportunity to explore with into those different environments, or, what else is there in the world that could be created. I'm very interested in the idea of generative conversation online, because there's not a lot of it. There's a lot of polarizing conversation online. And I recognize it's a real challenge to have generative conversation online. It might be that places like Facebook and these sorts of things are not places for generative conversation.
It's a damn shame, but
I think they used to
right.
be a lot more. And I do think there's been somebody pointed out that around about 2017, there was a significant algorithmic change on Facebook.
Well, also that was at the heart of, some serious strategic polarization.
Yeah.
Right? What
Yeah.
we now know about what was going down behind the scenes
Mm.
of Facebook and all of that.
Mm.
I'm listening. I'm trying to remember the name of the book I'm listening to, where they were, how minds change. Could that be what it is? I don't know.
Mm.
But where they're interviewing some of the, the people that were involved in that campaign, it was massive.
Mm.
Of, I mean, the impact that it had, not just on the election, which is obvious, but on the polarization, the destabilization of culture and society, certainly here in the US.
Mm. Yeah.
That and the data collection. I mean, you and I could, have that conversation, but so.
Yeah, it's going to get more and more whack. Like,
it's going to get more and more.
I did a whole episode.
There has to be some counterbalance, and I'm with you, honey. In how do we try to have these generative conversations? How do we try and find the common threads, so that we are, I mean, I know it's going to sound cliched, but you're truly a part of the solution, and we got kids, right? We want.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, this is why, for me, I'm very interested in the concept of collective sense making. How do we, because like, if people are not making sense together, if they're not finding ways, and there's skill involved in that now, and there's also issues around technology and algorithms that are not interested in people doing collective sense making. They're interested in whatever they're interested in, something else,
Well, if they can break up a feeling of community, if they can break that up, then we're much easier to target. And whether that's for, monetary gain, what they can sell us, what they can, how they can influence us. But, the one thing that is really fucking lacking is living your life with an understanding that we're herd animals. And, being ostracized reads like pain in the brain. Yeah. And yet we have a whole generation, that is being played, and that breakdown of, of group sense making, world sense making, cultural sense making, and meaning more, more appropriate in certain areas. And so, it is something that I have been thinking about as well for quite some time.
Yeah.
How do we take what we're doing in our change work, whether it's one-on-one or in our classes, how do we take that and go beyond it and ripple out?
Yeah.
An impact.
I'm totally on board with you with that project. And to me, it's like, I can talk about change work. I can talk about hypnosis, and I've been in that game a long time. So I've got some pretty clear ideas about what kind of things work, what kind of things don't work. I'm still open-minded, but, but to me, that bigger project is, I have a lot less certainty about what needs to happen there. So there's a lot more questions.
And that's why, on many levels, I'm fascinated by it, because I don't know. I'm almost always fascinated far more by what I don't know than what I know. You know what I mean? That's just my nature.
Yeah.
So, it's just something I've been putting my mind to and coming up with ways and making connections to broader organizations that are not necessarily in the change work space, but certainly making changes,
Yeah. And this is one of the things, like with my sort of agents of everything, a loose concept, and it is a loose concept. It's an intentionally loose concept. It's about people being in touch with their agency, their ability to bring about generative differences in the world, wherever they are being, and of course, it's not simple to define what a generative difference is. To me, it's about stuff that contributes and grows something more. It's not about zero-sum gaming things and making things happen the way you want them to happen.
Right.
It's how do you co-create new possibilities and new outcomes? Because in a sense, like, this is how I am with clients. I think probably you are as well. I don't come in and going, right, what are we going to install as a new behavior in you? Like as if I know what would be a good idea, or even the clients, whichever part of the client I'm talking to at that time knows what's a good idea. Instead, it's more about that co-creative dance. It's like, how do we get into the system here? How do we play? How do we create? How do we get the magic happening so we get to surprise ourselves with the good stuff that unfolds from this?
Yes. And that is unfortunately what so many practitioners really need to get comfortable with. In my training, it's really, I refuse to give things like scripts and this and that, because it really is a dance, and it's a dance that is unfolding each and every time differently, depending on the client, as you said, what part of the client you're communicating with, the practitioner, and whatever part of the practitioner that's showing up.
Yeah.
And then how do you, in many ways, just kind of allow subtle noticing difference, right? Think Ellen Langer and what's new and different here, and what's new and different here, and how do we keep kind of, allowing that difference to unfold in a way, and at the same time, James, and this is where, I too am a stickler. How do we allow it to unfold in an organic way, right? Which is a co-creative process, and yet be strategic enough to make sure that we are lighting up the neural network, interjecting that change, whatever that change is, however it unfolds, and making sure that it gets reconsolidated into that, that neural network. And so there is this balance that I love. And I feel like, this last course I did was really about how, teaching it a little differently, having a little bit more time to teach it, to kind of track the changes, over a 3-month period, and then having ongoing supervision and practice nights kind of forever. I've been doing practice nights for my students for over 20 years. Every other Wednesday, I'm there answering questions and then allowing them to play and to practice and to hone their skills and to try out something new that they wouldn't normally do with a client, because it's the only way to grow. And so being able to track it is really crucial for me as a trainer.
Yeah.
Because it's a delicate balance. I'm not giving these patent things that are easy to kind of check. Oh yeah, they hit this, they did the double dissociation, they did the rewind, they did this, they floated in, they did, this is a very different kind of supervision, because everyone is creating their own dance, and that dance shows up differently with each individual client.
Right.
Or group.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is that balance of strategy and allowing. Strategy and allowing.
Yeah. And this, I think, is at the heart of all craft. A good tennis player is going to be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You say, well, what's the formula for winning Wimbledon? What's the 7-step process? It's just, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that somebody's going, oh, so there's no structure, so I can just go in and just swing a racket. In fact, I'll take a golf club. It's like, well, no, that's not going to work, right? So
often people think that, because they'll be like, well, I watched you do a few of these demos, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to do that. And I'm like, well, you're not. You're going to be able to do this, something different. I'm going to give you the shape of it. I'm going to give you the key components. how you reach those key components,
Yes.
that's up to you and your client. And
Yeah.
I'll give you 75 possible ways of reaching it.
Yeah.
All of them hold space for something new to emerge, something I couldn't have foreseen as your trainer. You know what I mean? And I think too many people, are not willing to sit with their students in uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Because as humans, we want to help. We want to stop that. We want to be like, no, let me make it clearer for you. No, let me design your particular, and it's like, that is something that I feel I'm always still working on, because there is that tendency to clarify for that particular client in that specific way, when what they need to do is to get a little more comfortable, not knowing, because they're only half of the equation.
Yeah.
The client brings the other half. And if I can get you into that space where you can play and bring in curiosity, and playfulness, it's all going to go okay. As you said, difference will be made.
Yeah. It's like,
Know how to activate the thing and then throw around some difference and then solidify it at the end, it'll all be good. And then every change worker looks different. Every change worker brings their own voice, their own history, their own neuro associations, their own, style and voice. And this way I'm not cranking out, a bunch of people that are just obviously doing the same patterns.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I really appreciate my boxing coach, a guy called Craig McEwen. He's an ex-professional boxer. But like, like a lot of boxing coaches are like, no, right? Put that hand there, right in the cheek. Now this foot, like change the angle of that foot, right? And they're so prescriptive about how you box. But he's just like, lets you start boxing however you're going to box. Suggests an adjustment, suggests this, suggests that. Notices things that are working, encourages you to do more of that, points out some other possibilities around there. But there's no rule in his mind about, if I'm doing something, because I've got like a whole history of martial arts, stuff that comes from outside of boxing that can be applied in boxing. If I'm doing stuff that comes from outside of boxing that can be applied and it's going to work within the context, he's like, yeah, that's great. He's not trying to take it away or correct it or make it right. Now, I absolutely, I love working with him for that reason. There's another coach at the same gym who's completely, no, this is the correct way to box. So I'm going to get rid of all your bad habits and correct you and all of this. And I hate working with that guy. I can't see that he's ever going to bring out the best in me within that context. And this is the way I see everything. I see, I'm always saying this to people that have been in my online deep apprenticeship. I'm closing that down, but this isn't about learning to be like me. It absolutely isn't. It's about you becoming who you are going to be, the hypnotic facilitator that you're going to be, the change work practitioner that you're going to be. If you can take stuff from what I have to offer, you can play with that, you can explore with that, you can make your own connections with it, your own insights, create something with it.
Did I just ask, because I know I know that you're closing down this thing. And I know that when you opened it up and I was snooping around in there, I just couldn't believe the amount of good stuff that allows people to do exactly what you're talking about, which is, you're giving all of this. There's so much there. So
yeah, there is
did I hear
too much there
that you're allowing people to kind of buy in and still have access to that? Because I know that some students that, really want to know. So
yeah. So I am closing it down. And the reason I'm closing it down is not because like, I don't think it's good enough or anything like that. It's just that sometimes the reboot needs to happen.
I get it.
And what's actually happened with that is as across the 3 years I've been running it, there's now like 630 lessons in it, mostly video, some audio. There's a lot of stuff in there. And frankly, it's in a sense, it's overwhelming for people. Now it's great, but they're like, and there's there is some structure there, but I think I want to take it and I want to reorganize it and I want to use the material in different ways and all of this kind of thing. And some of it I may never use. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do, but I want to restart again.
Sure. There's something about having a clean
yes.
canvas.
Yeah.
And I get that. I've done it myself. I had a portal with a bunch of stuff in there.
Yeah.
You know, some of it is making its way into other areas, but I do want to say, having been inside that thing of yours, it is incredible. And if people have a relaxed amount of time to view it own way and don't feel overwhelmed, because, you know, it's something that it's like a library, you know, you can go in and take out a book, you can go in and watch a video.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's kind of important.
And that's why, like, a lot of people who have been in it, and there's so much stuff in it, and I know that they want to go through that stuff and they want to cover that stuff. And also, of course, they got lives. We've all got lives. Yeah. And like expecting people to go, well, I'm going to just take out a whole bunch of months and dedicate myself to studying this isn't always reasonable. So I wanted to shut it down so I'd free myself, because I've had a commitment to create new content all the time. And I want to take my content generating activities and put them into a different context, different creative headspace. I've been doing like open frames to support that. And I want to find another way of doing that because I really like doing the open frames with people. But the choice is to shut it down. But a lot of people inside are going, but you can't shut it down because, you know.
I only just got here. I haven't gotten through the material. I hear you. I know.
So this is why, as in closing it down, I'm saying to people who are inside of it, you know, you can have lifetime access to that material. There won't be ongoing support via that, you know, but if people want to join, I'm going to do something else at some point. I will be continuing to teach in different ways, but that material in that form, it's an incredibly rich resource library, even though I do say so myself. It's been built up across not just 3 years, but a lot of material I brought into it at the front end. I'd been
from way back when. I know.
Yeah. And I did an interesting thing there, which a lot of people really like, is I actually went and did almost like, you know, people do reaction videos all over YouTube and this kind of thing.
James, this is what I saw when I first was snooping in.
Yeah.
Right. And that I loved. I thought it was brilliant because I too have so much content that I would do better now, right? Having learned all these years. And yet so much of it is still pretty spot on in certain ways. And I was like, that's a clever way of doing it, where you do a reaction video to your own stuff, where you're like, yes. And since then, I do it this way now.
Because I think there's real value, because at different points in your own development, you're going to think about things in different ways.
Yeah.
So like back then, I might have some video tutorials from 10 years ago where I thought about things in one way, which is going to be of real value to people. Now, if I just get rid of that and go, well, I'm going to teach it the way I would teach it now, I might think that that's better. But for some people, there may have been some certain ways of framing it that got lost. There might be value that got lost in that. So my challenge there is like,
burst of knowledge, by the way, you know, the evolution of it, you know, the stuff that you just want to start where you are now.
Right. Exactly. So I thought to myself, well, the best thing to do here is perhaps if I leave that stuff, but I just update it. You know, I just sort of come in from time to time, pause the video and come in and give like an updated view. And I wasn't really thinking about it like this, but a lot of people have said that's been of real value to them, to get that sort of double perspective across time and see how I've changed it and compare what I was doing then to what I'm doing now, which is not to say what I was doing then was wrong. It just had different sensibilities behind it, possibly.
And it's the evolution. And the thing about that is you're also unconsciously modeling the continuation of learning. There is this model of being able to change your mind, to expand out into a slightly different perceptual position on the same topic, on the same work. So yeah, it's not wrong. It's just how you were looking at it then, which is still very relevant. And then it's all value add. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because not only the new perspective, but the model of being able to change your mind, of being able to keep evolving, of being able to expand your perspective as a trainer, that's a damn good model.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I do think it's come out really, really well. And in a sense, that wasn't how I was thinking about it to start off with. But, you know, that's what's emerged from that process. And I do think I think there's, like I often say to people, there's a whole bunch of stuff there that you will not get anywhere else. And because what I'm doing there is I am showing my thinking, I am showing my evolution, I'm showing my work. I'm not just kind of doing the math and not showing the workings. Like I'm showing all the workings, you know. So now I will agree there are some people out there that go, I don't want the workings, just show me the process. But they're the people that want to learn to win Wimbledon with the 6-step process for winning Wimbledon, you know, rather than actually really developing themselves as a real player, you know, of that particular game or whatever. So, you know,
say what I finally like really started to own, those are not necessarily the right people to learn.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is, you know, that is a thing that I know very well. As you know, I used to interview everybody before they took my training. You know, that used to be my thing before I started teaching more in, you know, bigger and bigger groups. Because I am not the right trainer for everybody, you know, and I want whoever learns from me, I want it to be one of the most amazing learning experiences ever. That's my goal. It's always a lofty goal. And I know that there are certain personality types that probably are not going to be a good fit. And those are the ones that want the step, you know what I mean? Like everything mapped out. They want everything in a manual. They want everything, you know, just show me the steps. Stop saying this shit is all made up. It makes me anxious. You know what I mean? Like, and so, and they're not, and, you know, they're just not gonna, you know, I'm a very New York trainer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing. I mean, I do stuff now for people that resonate with my way of doing it. And people have said to me, you know, oh, you need to like, you know, simplify this or whatever. I don't think I make things complex. I am doing my best to unpack and simplify things, but not simplisticify things, you know, not like take them down to the level where you just lie, basically, because anybody that says you can take a complex system like another human being's mind in its environment or brain in its body in its environment, I just run a doc process by the numbers without paying attention to what's actually unfolding in front of you. It's a lie. I mean, you might get lucky from time to time.
Sure.
You know, but like, you know, if you don't know the principles, you don't know what you're paying attention to, you've got no criteria for going, are we headed in the right direction here? Or, you know, if you've got none of that going on, you're just crossing your fingers and crossing your toes and hoping for the best. And I don't think that's...
And you know what? And many times that stock stuff will work, and maybe not the way you're thinking it's working, but maybe it's, you know, the fact that that complex individual, you know, in front of you is meaning making what you're giving them in a way that they can adapt and make use of, because that's what we do as humans. You know, we're meaning making. So you might mean one thing. You can't guarantee that the difference that they're going to take from that is what you meant.
Right.
They mean.
Yeah, I always see clients as creative entities. So I'm aware that I'm not doing anything to them. I'm just kind of taking them through some experiences and offering them some things. And ultimately it's their own, what I often call the generative intelligence. You know, it's their generative intelligence that's going to take that stuff and create interesting things, you know, maybe just disrupt what was and see what emerges going forward, or maybe just make a new...
And sometimes disrupting what was is a key player that allows a person to live a life that's easier and better. So, you know, even though we try and we're always shooting for this whole big, you know, thing here, sometimes just stopping the pattern they've been running, interjecting just enough difference where they can play with their kids on the playground and not fight or flight is a fucking beautiful thing.